Awesome. All right. We're going to budget workshop.
Okay. Okay. Shall we?
Yeah.
Great. So this is a follow-up workshop to address some of the questions that came up after we presented the budget. We went into Finance Committee and members of the Finance Committee asked several questions and we categorized them, answered many of them at the committee meeting yesterday, but then we're saving a couple topics for this workshop just because we understood these particular topics we're going to talk about now to be things that all board members had a lot of interest in. So if you want to forward it, Erin. So what we're doing now, kind of our goals, if you will, are to grow shared understanding of the future budget outlook so that helps you make decisions about the FY24 budget. And one thing I'll just say about that particular goal is that, you know, even as we were preparing it, we start getting really interested in next year and ultimately we're not, you know, we're teeing up things, but it's not so that we start making decisions about moves we're going to make in FY25. It's more just because understandably folks have a lot of questions about, you know, why are we using ESSER the way we are? What should we be kind of anticipating for the future? So the spirit of this conversation is really about how that grounds you so that you can, you know, make your recommendations on how, you know, what you do with what we've proposed as the budget. And then the second piece of it will be to provide some more transparency into the HR and finance FTE needs and proposed investments. So even questions pertaining to that came up at different points this evening. So we'll kind of unpack that a little bit more with you all. So that's the workshop agenda. So we're going to start off with the financial outlook and then talk about some of these strategies. And Miranda's going to kick us off with that piece.
Thank you, Malia. Good evening, everybody. So this first slide that you're looking at is really a summary of our FY25 financial outlook, and it's really intended to be a very rough first pass at projecting the budget gap that we could be facing for FY25. So we went over the details behind some of these numbers last night in Finance Committee, so I'm not going to go through them, through all the background of them right now. Instead, the purpose here is really just to show you the scale of the bottom line gap that we could be looking at and what the primary drivers of that gap are likely to be for next year's budget process of the FY25 process. So we're looking potentially at a loss of state funding next year of $5.7 million. That's really a pessimistic case. You know, we don't have a crystal ball here, but that's, you know, what we could be facing. And so we kind of wanted to do the plan, what was it? Plan for the worst, hope for the best kind of figures on this page for you guys to see the potential impacts we could be looking at for next year. We have core programming. That's programming that was previously funded by local funds that we shifted or we have proposed in the recommended budget as it currently stands, proposed to shift it to ESSER 3 for next year of $2.55 million. We have an additional $5.25 million of ESSER programming funded for next year or proposed to be funded for next year in our budget process. That funding will end after the end of FY24. We have just kind of a generic projection for rollover costs of about $5.7 million for next year. We anticipate about $1.7 million rolling on for debt service in FY25 as well, again, driven by our BFOF projects. So that amounts to a total potential budget gap of almost $21 million, which would imply, all else equal, a tax rate increase of approximately 18%. So starting from that all-in budget on the prior slide, this aims to show the scale of the reductions that could be necessary just to reach, you know, the ballpark of an acceptable tax rate for next year. So for scenario one, a tax rate increase of approximately 9%, targeting that from, you know, the 21 million that I said on the prior slide, we need to reduce about $10 million, 7%, 12.25, and 5%, $14.5 million.
Great. Or not great, but thank you. Wait, that was not the right transition. So now that you kind of have that sense of what we might be facing, we wanted to surface some of the structural shifts. So we keep alluding to the fact that we have ESSER if it's going to help us preserve core services for students this year, which we think is important to do. And that it gives us another year of time to start to enact some bigger structural changes while simultaneously, of course, pursuing changes to the revenue side. But we feel like we need to start planning for the structural stuff and not counting on that revenue side coming in as at the level that we would need. So again, we're not going to go deep here, but again, just giving you kind of a high level sense of what we might be looking at. So where we have financial figures here, they're approximate and they're outdated, but they've, been looked at in recent years. So they give you kind of a approximate sense, but all of these, if we start to pursue them, obviously would require a much deeper analysis to revisit exactly what we're looking at. So the first shift that I think probably has gotten the most conversation since it was initially brought up is the notion of elementary reconfiguration. So this is to shift over to pre-K through 2 and 3-5 and then 3 through 5 schools. That got a lot of traction initially because it did have some potential programmatic upside. And then it also saves some money. The way we save money, just to be clear, is through people. It's through FTEs. So when we do this reconfiguration, we're more efficient. So we're ultimately cutting, educators, just to be clear about that. And even with that at the time when we looked at it, only netted us about $1 million savings. The second thing is to explore increasing class size. And so that would also save about $1 million. The analysis here, again, rough analysis, is to increase each grade span by a couple of students. And just as a moment, let's pop Erin to the next slide because people were interested in going the other way with class size. So we just wanted to quickly bring that up here. This has come up in Finance Committee a couple times. So in response to questions last night, we did this quick analysis. So the conversation was, could we look at what it would take to do a 17-to-1 ratio for grades K through 3, which is staying within the upper range of the research about where lower class size is most meaningful. And so basically that would mean we have to add 32 additional FTE, totaling about $2.5 million. So that's an add to the budget. It would also require 23 additional classroom spaces. And for those of you that attended Finance Committee meeting, you'll recall that we have very limited space left. I think total across the schools, we have 9 classrooms available. And that's, right now today, we're continuing to enroll students. So we literally don't even have the facility space for that, but just wanted to note that here since we're mentioning the class size, because that's been named as a potential way to save some money. So then popping back, the other thing that's been looked at is the middle school model. This does save us a little bit more money, about $3 million when we did this analysis. This is going back to the old school junior high model, like probably many of us had. So it's more like a high school model. So you don't have that house structure where you've got your 4 core teachers with the 100 kids. And so it's, more efficient, meaning it requires less educators. And that's why you end up saving that money. High school class size, just increasing the class size. I think it was going to about 30 per, is that what we did? 30 for this one saves a little over $500,000. The high school consolidation is something people obviously are interested in and asking about. We would need to do more research on that. I mean, we obviously have the high school design process underway. Some of the back of the envelope we've done, there's not necessarily a ton of savings because the number of students is the number of students. But we could look at that, and get kind of more drilled down into what that might be able to save. The other idea is to reduce non-classroom FTEs. So essentially changing our ratio-based methodology for ESOL teachers, special ed, social workers, and then reducing other roles like youth development, coaching, et cetera. So those are, things that have been raised. Transportation and bell schedule. So this is essentially a proposal that we could look at that would be to essentially get fewer routes. And we do that by changing the bell schedule or the start times, and also utilizing Metro for the middle school students in grades 6, 7, and 8. Athletics and co-curricular gets you 2 million, and that's to wipe it all out. So that's our total budget. So that would be to eliminate, looking at you and your comments tonight and saw your eyebrows, Kaden. So, but just people have raised that as a question. So it's on the list here, but that gets you about $2 million. The admin office relocation. So this is central office. And so that would be on the table. People have wondered, could that potentially make us money? So we did do a deep dive into this. Last year, was that, Aaron? We actually had an intern from the Rue Institute who was in the project planning internship, spend a half a year with us to really flesh this out. We can share some of what came out of that. And basically, there are some potential cost savings. I think we'd want to revisit that. One of the takeaways was there's cost associated as well, because you still end up needing people to have offices and to have the stuff they need. We need a place for our multilingual center to greet families, to do intake. So it's not as sort of straightforward as, oh, ditch the building and it's all, upside. There's also quite a bit of impact to how we work and function. There's millions of records that we're in the process of doing digitization for, which also has a big cost. So there's a lot of layers to that one, but certainly something we would, can be on the table for further exploration, and probably needs to be anyway, just because of the state of that building. Island schools, some people bring up, we would want to look again at this if there was any appetite for looking at it, because there's a possible tax revenue impact, meaning we'd lose tax revenue. So that's, again, like most things, not totally straightforward. Some people have asked about Cliff in particular. I think we're going to have 3 students there next year. So that's, something that we need deeper research on. COLA reductions has also been raised. And so that's obviously got to be negotiated with our bargaining units. And you basically get about 850,000 per % that you take off the increase, if that makes sense. And then the final structural proposal that's been raised is to reduce the school year for students. That also has to be negotiated because that's wages. And that's about 350,000 per day that you make up. Okay. So none of these, well, I guess my opinion is none of these are, well, there's mix. There's some things in here like that could have some programmatic benefit, but overall, this is the list we've looked at before. We've done some analysis on, and that we're kind of resurfacing just so it's in front of you all. Because as we move through this budget, after we kind of get through what we're going to do for this year, we'll have to start thinking about what are we planning for the future. As you can see, these all take a lot of time to backward plan and to do effectively and to do thoughtfully in communication with the community. Again, we wanted to note here at the bottom, there's the whole revenue side of this too. And we are thankful to Carrie and the union for getting organized on their side and wanting to do this in a collaborative way. But again, we don't want to assume that we can just bank on that and not start to put into motion things that have to happen. So in summary, a few things we wanted to just say, sort of the upshot, if you will. We know ESSER is a temporary solution, and it enables us to preserve key programming for our students this year that we think is really valuable. With that being said, we know we need to start planning this spring for our FY25 budget, given the loss of ESSER funds, plus all those additional loss of funds and increasing costs that Miranda stepped you through. And then when you look at that list of potential solutions, they all require significant change to how we organize schools, but none are a silver bullet. So, if we are looking at those numbers of reductions, you would have to make multiple moves on that list in order to sort of get to what's maybe going to be needed. And then ultimately, again, the point of this conversation today is not yet to start that FY25 work, but is rather to help give you context to inform if you're going to approve in advance the budget that we recommended for FY24. And so, if you do pursue deeper cuts this year, it doesn't change the gap for next year. So if that, understandably, I'd be thinking, if we cut more now, is that going to help us in the future? That doesn't help the gap for next year. So anything I missed there, Erin? Okay. So we probably makes sense to pause now before we get into the HR and finance and see if folks want to ask any further questions on this.
Yeah, Board Member Figdor, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much for this very sobering information. I just wanted to make a comment that I believe in 2019, there was a subcommittee, myself and Lori Davis, who worked with the superintendent looking at possible budget cuts and just raising it because we did have a pretty in-depth analysis looking at the island schools at that point. And I'll just say that what I remember off the top of my head is that there was no justification for moving forward there. And not significant savings to be found, but that's just my rudimentary memory of that.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to raise that there's definitely some good information, from that work that was done back several years ago.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Emily. And I think just like same thing with the central office piece, there's that whole analysis. So once we start to get more serious about planning in this way, we'll pull up those analyses. And just so you know, that list that you referenced, that is what we used to inform this. So that was the list that's informing the slide that you see in front of you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So can you say that again? The list that was in this presentation was from where?
So when Emily mentioned the deep analysis that was done in previous years, so we've, this has come up before. So we keep coming back to that, seeing if there's been new recommendations. There's been some things that are like, we absolutely know you can't do, but that's sort of been that list we pull back out and
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Board Member Upperman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this transparency and the depth and openness to what could happen and what will happen over the next couple of years. For this year, I'm looking to see that whatever we do this year, wherever we focus this year, it will be a focus that can be continued over the next 2 years for the needs of the students, the very classroom-based needs of the students. And that's all I'll say as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Upperman. Vice Chair Bondo, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the structure shift here. Just have a little clarification on the reduction planning here. So when I see those, that's one we look at forward, right? If we want to see some saving right here. Mm-hmm. So those bullets here, so I mean, if we have some combination of some of those bullets, I just look at that. If you look at it like the way you've been working and look at which one is making more sense to combine for each other. I mean, what the combination can be the most explainable here can build for the next steps, because there's a lot of bullets here. Mm-hmm. Just if you look at the right now, mm-hmm. what we can, making from now to 2 years to come, what kind of combination those 2 or 3 bullets can start making mm-hmm. sense for us to start thinking about it.
I mean, I think the question is a good one, right? So you're kind of starting to get in, if I'm understanding you correct, Mickey, into the strategy, right? So how would we go about strategically prioritizing, making choices that might actually fit together well? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think for tonight, we weren't thinking we're going to get that deep into it. I think we're trying to help you all see why we feel so urgent to start to have exactly the conversation you're naming, Vice Chair Bondo, this spring, that we can't wait till like next December to be like, oh, we've got to. So I think what from our perspective, we'd move through this FY24 budget,
Right.
get that passed and move forward, and then start to take up this exact work that you're naming.
Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Board Member Victor?
Yeah, sorry, I had a couple other things. One is I'm wondering if redistricting could have some potential cost savings and if it should be added to this list. I can't remember if it's something that we considered in 2019. But just thinking about potential efficiencies to be gained if we were considering redistricting. And then I'm wondering if when we have the conversation in the spring, if we can use as a starting point some principles that we're using to guide how we enter into the conversation. So we're clear about how we might approach making these kinds of decisions. I would appreciate spending as much time up front as possible to set those values, principles, objectives, however we frame them, before we delve into any of the details. So we're clear about what we're trying to preserve as we make some very hard decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great process point. Once we get the FY24 budget kind of, onto the city council, I think it'll be appropriate for us to kind of begin the conversation at that place and then, be looking at the analyses of these. Just to the point around the redistricting, do we anticipate that we'll have a spring workshop at some point? The Davis Demographics Updated is in the process of finalizing their updates to kind of our enrollment and demographic study from, I think it was 2019 and done in combination with the facility study at that time. So they're in the final stages of that. And so we anticipate doing a whole engagement around that, a workshop at some point this spring. So that'll help to inform that piece.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, Board Member Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. So what we're looking at is 20, almost 20 million that without the SRF for FY25.
Yeah. And the SRF on that slide is a portion of that 20 million, but yeah, without SRF and all those other factors, 20 million gap.
Oh.
Worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Well, who knows? As far as what we know today, worst case.
That would be a very tough situation. I just have a comment about what I'm thinking about is to combine cutting some areas and increasing the tax both, and next year also do the same thing, just to balance it out, avoiding and leaning to one of the each. So either the reality is that we need to cut a huge FY25, or we need to increase tax very high. So to avoid that and just to face the reality that we kind of combine cutting some areas after researching and all the workshops that we will have, and also increase the tax and do that the same thing next year. And that will be, it will hurt community and everybody, but at least it will have kind of balance it up. Thank you.
Yeah, comment on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate that question. Board Member Youssef brings us back to, just how does this context inform our decision making for FY24 budget? And I guess we'd offer, that's what we're attempting to do with what we've put forward with the proposed reductions and with the property tax rate at the 7%, right? Recognizing that that's a higher tax rate than we've had in recent years. So a significant ask of the community at the moment. And, beginning to make some initial reductions, all right? we have the just $775 or $750,000 in local reductions. But so beginning some of that, but not fully going there, because if we make more dramatic reductions this year, as Malia named in the slide, those are not available to us to make reductions for next year to combat that gap. And it also has factored into kind of our debt service strategies we talked a little bit about last night, being able to mitigate the impact of it this year, but preserving funds. And I think that'll be a conversation that was alluded to in the finance committee as we move into that next year of how to strategically use what remains of our, fund balances and debt reserves to possibly offset, even more than, those will be options we'll have to consider next year as well. But just to bring it back, our budget is kind of trying to consider the balancing. I appreciate you framing it that way, with beginning some work, recognizing we have ESSERF right now. So it's hard to make us, we have ESSER funds to serve to meet student needs in the immediate moment. So making dramatic reductions right now while we have those additional resources is also a challenging kind of concept to advance. So we're trying to be able to balance that, set some parameters for kind of what the tax rates potentially need to be able to sustain the level of programming we've been able to provide historically, so that next year we have a few more options, right, to kind of mitigate that gap and figure out the right combination of strategies of reductions, tax rate increase, and use of debt service.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I would just add, and this came up last night, that we are trying to advocate at the state level for any kind of changes that can help make this scenario a little bit less horrible than it is right now. But we, again, don't have those solutions, or we don't know what that's going to look like. But that is happening. Board Member Opperman, did you have another question? I couldn't tell.
Yes, sort of, kind of, yes. My thought is, as we are negotiating and working with the city council this year for FY24, and they're aware of all their issues, and part of the problem where, even though we just did a reevaluation, the reality is that it isn't even close to what some property value is here. And I think perhaps that piece, tax evaluation situation, need to be thought on their end of the world. So just a thought.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Any other questions on this portion of the presentation? Yeah, Board Member Grant.
Just a little history for a moment. If anyone
Can you
knows.
speak into your microphone,
sorry.
please?
Just a little history, if anyone knows, how does the FY25 budget compare to the last pre-ESSERF budget, as just a comparison? If anyone remembers.
Miranda, or we could follow up.
I probably don't immediately know, but
Yeah,
if you could just clarify your question, do you mean what was the actual
yeah.
local budget for?
Well, I'm just trying to compare apples to apples between pre-ESSERF and post-ESSERF.
Right. I can get you those,
Yeah.
get you history. I think we probably had some budget history slides. I could pull it up and perhaps get back to you later in the workshop.
But just acknowledging that the apples are going to be from different orchards, like given the context of the world, they're not going
Oh, I
to
know.
be immediately apple. Just for anyone listening at home, we're not really looking at the
I
same
probably shouldn't
apple.
have used
Okay,
that metaphor, but
no, that's okay.
just trying to illustrate.
Right, the inflation free and all the,
Yeah.
free all the contracts.
Yeah, but I do think it will be helpful to see. Thank you. You ready to keep moving?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Beautiful.
Okay, I think you're going to take the next piece.
And would like to invite as well. So thank you, Budget Director Miranda Fasulo, but would like to invite our Director of HR Operations, Chris St. Louis, and our Executive Director of District Operations, Terry Young, also just they may help field questions as we move through the next piece. Sorry, let me get to those slides. So just in response to questions, that came up in Finance Committee about understanding kind of some of the rationale for the proposed investments and kind of the finance, payroll, HR realm. So this is intended to offer a little bit more depth than, we were able to kind of talk to in our initial budget presentation. First, the kind of key, what has dominated, kind of the experience over the past, 6 months, right, has certainly been the payroll issues and kind of employee experience of that. So that is central, right? Underlying that, and certainly going back to the prior year, were audit findings about some of our processes that related to finance. And, we anticipate kind of the updated audit here shortly and anytime. So we'll look forward to that. But I think what we are, kind of predicting will be true, or kind of addressing these core issues as it's spoken to on the slide. So the first major bullet talks about improvement of internal control structures, and that really speaks primarily to kind of our payroll systems. So one of the key findings was needing to increase the segregation of duties. So we've talked about this at different points where, ultimately, kind of more colloquially, a lot had been put on payroll's plate. They were doing a lot of the data entry for payroll, then also running the payroll. And kind of in accounting practice, that's not best practice. Those duties should be segregated. There should be separate people entering how much people are getting paid and elements around their benefits, and somebody else executing the payroll. Those should be different functions. And over time, those had gotten combined within our district. So that's one of the things we're trying to address, is being able to accomplish that segregation of duties. Being able to institute payroll review processes. So we're beginning some of this work as it stands now anyway, but having kind of, spot checks, audit checks before, the payroll is uprolled and ready to go, and then just make sure it's good and ready to go. Documentation of our payroll information. Again, we're not waiting on some of these things. We've improved a number of processes as it's related to this, but that's an ongoing body of work. And then ongoing kind of monitoring of leave balances and those other kind of personal time off benefits. So those are things that were cited that we're working to build capacity to control for. And then the other is continuing with efforts out of the audit that, came out last spring, that was more geared around some of our purchasing and other accounting functions, at which we've taken significant steps this year, but we had positions that had been funded in ESSERF this past year. That's part of what we're proposing to bring into the local budget to be able to sustain some of those improvements. So these are kind of the core issues we believe, if we build capacity and add the resources that we're talking about, that will make significant progress on these. And as a result, right, we will have, as it relates to payroll and the employee experience, significantly improved accuracy, timeliness of payroll, and thus significantly improved employee experience from that perspective, which is obviously fun. The auditing concerns are important and a technical, major technical concern. But, we prioritize kind of the experience of our employees as well alongside that. So just to speak, I'll speak, kind of high level, but if there are further questions, that's where Chris, Terry, and Miranda may be able to weigh in more deeply. So just as we speak about in terms of the investments in payroll specifically, I think the question, that was brought to us in Finance Committee last week was, a little bit of a question of why the investment in HR and not seeing as much investment, given that Spinglass reflected, the recommendation of 4 FTE in payroll. So we're proposing kind of the adoption of the ADP contract, and we've talked about that in terms of some of the systems issues, that we've spoken about in a variety of forums that make it really challenging on a every 2-week cycle to keep our payroll on track. The number of, and principally one of the core issues is that our payroll functions operate in a different platform than our time and attendance and absence management. And so the interface between those is very challenging. And one of the solutions that ADP offers is integrating those all into one platform. So we see that as a huge asset to kind of advancing us forward. That's been the experience of other districts that, that we've consulted with. So that's a significant investment, not representative of an FTE per se, but also a significant investment to advance payroll. We also are, and I think kind of nominally have that 4th FTE at the moment in the form of the project management consultants that we have on board currently that are helping to collaborate and so function. We have Brianna Tyndall from Cohills Consulting, who's effectively operating with us now as an additional staff person supporting not just consulting, but actually doing work to help advance our transition to ADP. So we see that, in effect as kind of an FTE ad for the current moment, and they are on board through the initial implementation to ensure we're off on the right foot. So we're praying for that primarily out of current year funds, which is great. So that's why it's not reflected fully in the investments for next year. But we believe with those, and then ongoing for now until we get to the FY25 payroll, we're proposing to sustain the existing 3 locally funded FTE until we have more time under our belt with ADP and can further evaluate if that's the appropriate additional resourcing. We anticipate needing to maintain some local resourcing, right, from a payroll perspective, but we need to have more experience to know whether the right staffing configuration on an ongoing basis is what we need in terms of those existing 3 FTE. So the HR operations, we're, having the budget, the proposal of 3 additional HR generalists. And so, while, this is an investment in HR, I would reflect this ultimately as an investment in payroll also. So for one, this helps us to accomplish the segmentation of duties. So currently we just have 2 HR generalists. And so to be able to expand the capacity there to take on the additional data entry duties, to, address that audit finding and be able to, improve and this gets to my second bullet point, but to be able to take some of the work away from payroll, right, and to be able to have it held in HR in terms of that front end data entry around salary, wages, benefits, et cetera. And then, increase the capacity to provide employee service and processing. So over time with the reductions in HR, much got loaded into the payroll staff. So payroll staff was responsible with the technical implementation, as well as a variety of both monitoring and employee facing tasks. And so this proposal really helps to move payroll into what we feel is kind of its correct lane to ensure that they are focused on the technical execution and documentation associated, necessary associated with payroll, and that the HR staff can pull some of those duties that have crept into the, payroll department back, right? We can address kind of the auditing issues and be able to free up capacity for them to focus on their essential tasks. So, that HR generalist is, in service of our payroll department, as well as, more broadly our employee experience and being able to be timely responsive and supportive of our employees as we go through the onboarding processes, resolve concerns, et cetera, as they may come up. Lastly, the finance kind of proposed investments really, as I said, are kind of a maintenance of what had been funded out of ESSER funds this past year, to be able to continue to address the audit findings from the spring of 2022. So we have instituted a new position of a purchasing manager that's helped to develop significant new procedures around our purchasing, use of the purchasing cards, of a number of things that relate to the audit findings, but just improve processes. So we're proposing to move that into the local budget. Similarly, the grant accountant to be able to do, the formal accounting and reconciliation, of all of our, federal grants, so that, those processes are more streamlined. And so, and the last one, just to reflect here, because it was in the, has been in the budget documents, is the grant manager. That really is a more programmatic position that is helping us to manage and articulate in the state with our application and the working as a liaison with the state around our ESSER funding. And so that grant manager position, is proposed to remain in ESSER because we do envision that position sunsetting at the end of ESSER. So the ongoing local investments to address the auditing and payroll issues, are reflected by the purchasing manager and grant accountant positions. So that's a bit more clarity about kind of the issues that we're trying to, respond to and how our proposed investments align to those. Operations team, I don't know if there's anything I missed or that you might reframe. Okay. Well, we can open it up to questions and then go from there.
All right, Vice Chair Bondo.
Thank you so much. I just need some of the understanding on the Quiet Hill Consulting. So I see here then So they were paid under the FY 23. So I mean, that's the work they're supposed to do on this time frame. I mean, implementation on the ADP. I'm correct. I just want to get my sense right there. So, and I wonder, do we still need them for the FY 24? And if we still need them, what they're supposed to keep doing? Because when I see here, they're working through the implementation on the ADP, and then after that, we still need the expertise, or you I try to understand the estimate time frame then we need the service. And for the ADP implementation, when we have any estimation on the implementation time range.
So we will continue to use their services. They will run our payroll moving forward. The projected go live date is September 9th.
Okay.
We were hoping for August, but it may be able to go live earlier, but it looks like September 9th. But what we'll do is in August, we'll run parallel systems. So we'll process ADP. We'll process payroll through ADP, but we'll also keep using Munis, paying our employees through Munis, but verifying that ADP is processing correctly. And then we'll go live. So September 9th, employees will get their check and it will come from ADP. It will be generated by ADP.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
And Board Member Figueroa, I see you in just a second. I just wanted to ask a question, and I know that this has been in a previous slideshow, but I don't know where to pull it up. The additional 3 FTEs in HR, how close does that get us to the recommended ratio?
And Chris, if you can speak to this, the spin glass, in the spin glass, initial spin glass report, for an organization our size, it was essentially like 1 HR FTE per 100 employees. So, we have, ultimately about 2,000 individuals that work for us in some version. So that would, broadly speaking, suggest a staff of 20. I think currently, I know I don't have it at my fingertips, but, the combination, between our HR operations team and accounting for our diversity, equity, and belonging team, I think we are currently at 12.
12 or 11. Approximately with our staffing ratio, every employee that we add would add a 0.05 to the overall percentage. So where the goal is to get to, the ideal is 1.03. Right now, we're around a 0.55, 0.55 or 0.6. That is without support from temp staff. Adding each employee would add a 0.05. So this would add an extra 1.5 to that overall, 15 to that overall percentage. So it put us around a 7.75. But I would say that it would make a huge difference to our overall support to our Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Chris. Board Member Figueroa, did you still have a question?
Yeah, it's kind of building on Chair Lentz's question, which is just understanding that these are still, that these ads still lead us below the recommended ratios. I wanted to get feedback on, whether this level of staffing is really sufficient. And if we were to add positions, what would be the top priorities for where we added them?
I mean, I'll say, and then you guys can weigh in even further. As Chris just detailed, on the HR front, this doesn't necessarily bring us to kind of industry benchmark ratios. I think we were mindful that this did reflect 150% increase in HR generalist staffing. So, bearing in mind that additional capacity, at least on the HR side, within the context of our overall budget climate, and trying to address multiple priorities on both the operations and academic side, but particularly on the operations side. We have the advancing in our recommended budget of a couple of additional custodians, as well as some additional food service and transportation pieces. So we were trying to be judicious in trying to ensure that we're able to address a wide variety of operational needs that have crept up. So in a world that wasn't resource constrained, that might be our ideal, but this was our best effort to add the needed capacity and to see significantly increased capacity than we've had for the past number of years. It was going into the FY19 budget cycle that I think we reduced. I believe it was 2 FTE from 2 generalists. So this gets us back one above where the department had been previously.
Board Member Russellbetter.
Thank you, Chair. Just in following up on that, Superintendent Townsend, I just was wondering, because I'm pleased for us to be moving closer, absolutely. And it sounds like that will be impactful, those positions. Just wondering, in looking at future budgets, could there be the goal of continuing? And I know that's difficult to predict with, unknown financial constraints, but I just wonder, would you see that as a goal of, additionally moving forward closer to that recommended ratio in the coming budget years?
I mean, certainly that would be ideal. I mean, I think as we're proposing and we'll be monitoring closely in terms of what happens specifically with the ADP implementation and what the implications are as it relates to the ongoing needs around our technical payroll staffing, right? That'll be a conversation of are those resources that are just ultimately no longer needed, or are those resources that would shift, right, from one department to another, right, as we build our capacity to leverage what ADP offers, or are we in a position where no, we are in the need of additional resources even in a difficult budget environment? It would make that case. So this will be an ongoing conversation for sure in terms of evaluating what the right resource investments are as we move forward.
Board Member Opperman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about, organization within central office. I know we'll be having a new superintendent, and that person should have some say. But thinking about HR and diversity, equity, inclusion, and the possible overlaps in some aspects with that is to augment HR. Is that a real possibility?
I mean, we specifically, kind of split out those roles in our restructuring this year in order to ensure we, one of the challenges that, the prior director, Executive Director Stoddard had was, those priorities being kind of commingled and often strategy falling the wayside of, the operations, because the operational needs drive the day to day. And so, this is our attempt, I would say, we're in an ongoing process of collaboration of distinguishing kind of roles. And so that'll be continued, I think we'll continue to improve in that over time. I would say we are looking to, even in our current construct, not have redundant roles. I would say we do not have redundant roles. There's each serving distinct functions across those two departments and needed functions on both sides. So, for example, developing on, from the recruitment front, the diversity, equity, belonging team is focused on a lot of our internal pipeline development. So building out programs and structures specifically for ed techs to be able to grow into teachers and being able to provide that programming and support. And that's not something that the HR operations team has bandwidth, capacity, expertise to lead. So it's a complementary thing. They lead some of our external facing recruitment efforts, right? Kind of more traditional HR recruitment in that way. So that's an example of how those two units are kind of complementing our efforts to ensure we have high quality educators in every classroom.
And I could just add to that, because that's a case where, the DEB team's working on the internal leadership pathway component of recruitment, but then there's a whole set of other functions that the diversity of equity and belonging does that are not at all in the HR operations function. So our PLBSS system, the professional learning based salary system, is managed out of Deb. Our teacher all the evaluation, TVAL system, the career pathways, like you mentioned, employee relations is out of the DEB team, not at all in the HR operations function. We also have our student harassment discrimination and Title IX is all in that function. And then, we had a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we didn't replace. That's also all of that department's body of work is a part of this DEB function. So there's a ton of discrete domains that are in that function that are not overlapping. I think, I understand that question because like recruitment is a place where you heard recruitment here and you heard recruitment there. It's very distinct and different what those bodies of work are. But then there's all this other stuff that doesn't have any overlap really. And it's managed out of the DEB team.
I was just looking on the website and saying that the director of BIPOC Career Pathways was actually under HR at this point.
Oh, that's in DEB.
Oh, okay.
It's wrong on the website, you're saying?
It's wrong on the website. So, okay.
Yeah.
So, who in HR is doing recruitment in general?
So you want to speak to how you do recruitment, and then I think there's the internal pathways component, and then Chris is recruitment.
Thanks.
So we have an employee that oversees staffing and also our data as well in operations. And so that individual is the one that connects with all of our external resources, such like Indeed, serving schools, is researching new pathways for recruitment. However, they are working hand in hand also with the DEB team because with our director for BIPOC and a lot of the resources that she has and the recruitment and supporting internally, it goes hand in hand to where we actually also have regular meetings coming together to support each other in our recruitment goals. But I do have one individual person who in HR operations is working on that, and they are my direct report for all of our postings and such.
And I just would add one thing here, and this is for me, it's like recruitment is an example where we didn't do much recruiting before because we didn't really have to. I remember I came here from organizations that had significant recruiting functions because in a people business, it was like that was the most important thing is finding diverse talent. So I was a little bit like sort of off my chair. I'm like, we don't do recruitment. But we've had very strong teacher retention and like our recruitment, we could like post a job and that was recruitment. And of course, that's not to say people like if Barb's listening, of course there's efforts made. We had postings, but not the way, like you might have a concerted, super proactive because it was strategic at the time. We didn't really need it. That's changed for us. And so that's another contextual thing at play with what's shifted in the market and everything is the need to have proactive recruiting in addition to our deepened focus on diversifying our team, where we need to make very intentional proactive steps to recruit diverse people onto our team.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, superintendents, anything else you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. Let's, appreciate the questions and helping to kind of continue to go deeper on understanding both, what's in the budget and the context for it in terms of both, this piece, but also kind of the relationship between our decisions for FY24 as it relates to FY25 as we continue to move forward in this process. So just to name our next kind of stop on the budget tour is next Tuesday evening is our first joint city and school finance committee meeting. So we'll do that together with them. That's virtual. And then our finance committee will regroup afterwards in our own finance committee meeting. And so the goal there is to get to a place to recommend move the budget back to the full board for our April 4th meeting and a first reading and public hearing on April 4th.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all. And so we'll see you on the 28th if we don't see you before then. All right, the end.